Hello friends, I welcome you all to another edition of Daily News Analysis. So today is 12th November. In this particular edition, we are going to discuss some important articles. The first article that we are going to take a look at is role of forensics after the blast. So important analysis in the wake of say Red Fort, car explosion in recent times. So important update analysis from the perspective of say GS3 science and technology part. Apart from that, internal security part also it is important. Another important article is about Supreme Court judge criticizing the imported Western concepts as important ideas that may not save endangered species. So important analysis, the criticism of intergenerational equity given by the Supreme Court judge is very vital from the perspective of GS3 environment part. Another article is about SEBI warning against investing in digital gold. So what exactly is digital gold? In the wake of say recent rally in the gold prices at the global level, at the global markets, this particular analysis is important from the perspective of GS3 economy. Another important article from the perspective of international relations is the important visit of Prime Minister to Bhutan. So again vital. In particularly the decoded section, we are going to discuss the article titled Discord over Tribunals. So what exactly is the issue when it comes to the Tribunal Reform Act of 2021, and what exactly is the Supreme Court saying now when it comes to that particular act and the hearing in that regard that has recently happened. Important analysis from the perspective of GS2 judiciary. So stay tuned for that particular analysis as well. So the first article that we are going to discuss is about the role of forensics after the blast. So in recent times, we have all seen the horrific Red Fort, car blast, the I-20 car that exploded. So with the recent update as of now, so essentially the reason behind this particular blast is the ammonium nitrate explosion. So we have all seen the organizations involved, and the investigation overall is ongoing in that particular case. So we are going to see a lot of developments, the updates in that regard, and where exactly and who are responsible for this particular blast at the Red Fort, which actually took the lives of almost 12 to 13 people. So very unfortunate incident. Particularly it reminded us that the internal security issues that India is facing are tremendous. So from the perspective of say internal security also, this particular analysis and our earlier analysis of say terrorism in our earlier episode of DNA is very vital. So the issue of say terrorism emanating from say the foreign based organizations as well as the terror sort of bases that are there in India itself. So how to tackle them is another important problem, important aspect from the perspective of internal security. But from the perspective of say investigation of this particular blast, the role of forensic is very vital. So you all must have seen the area being cordoned off. You have also must have seen the visuals of say forensic department, the forensic teams collecting the evidences post the blast. So essentially the role of forensics particularly is very vital here, so that any sort of clues when it comes to the reasons for the blast, what sort of explosive particularly is used and in that particular blast, what could have been the intensity of the blast, and what sort of precautions that we can take going forward to handle these particular situations like say the explosive blast through say ammonium nitrate sort of explosives. So very vital. The forensics play very important role. So means when it comes to the news itself, what is latest, I just told you about it, but the focus is on say the use of ammonium nitrate, and earlier also we saw the recovery of almost 3000 kilograms of explosives in the nearby regions of Delhi. So that sort of the news is very concerning. So from the perspective of say science and technology, and particularly the chemicals explosives in news, ammonium nitrate is important. So just know what exactly is ammonium nitrate, how it acts as an explosive, although the same ammonium nitrate is used as a fertilizer also. So what sort of grade, at what sort of point this ammonium nitrate can become explosive is very vital. So essentially it is an explosive that has been used in this particular car blast. So that much is clear. So as I said earlier, the role of forensics is very, very vital here. So experts from the explosives department of the Delhi Forensic Laboratory have visited the scene, and I have just told you that we have all seen the visuals of them collecting the evidences and all those things. So what exactly is the primary job of, say, the forensic experts in such situations? See, the first and foremost is to observe and analyze the cause from the scientific perspective. So essentially, this is the minute data, the micro data, the micro samples they collect from, say, the site of the investigation is very, very vital. It gives the scientific perspective overall. Collect necessary samples in the process and also to test them in the laboratory so that the cause of the accident can be found. So the exact and pinpointed cause of the incident can be found. It is also worth noting that various media houses often report that forensic members collect samples from the site, which is partly accurate. That is true. Site does provide a wealth of information for any skilled forensic experts. But when it comes to this particular site, it is an explosive blast. So when the explosion happens, the the sort of pressure that it creates leaves very, very less evidence in the physical format as it is after the blast. So essentially, to certain extent, collecting samples from the blast sort of site becomes very, very difficult task, because the heat may reduce the important evidence to ashes. So essentially making the whole investigation very difficult to conduct. Despite this, the forensic experts continue their work meticulously. Despite that, the forensic experts continue the work. See, there is an important sort of principle that has been discussed in the article itself, that is called a Locard's principle. Remember that you can utilize such terms, principles effectively in your answers. It may add value. So essentially, what exactly is the Locard's principle? Locard's principle states every criminal leaves and takes traces from the scene. These traces can link the suspect to the site and help determine the explosion's intensity, source, and the type of explosives used. So essentially, the principle is based on the general principle of, say, criminal minds, that every criminal leaves and takes traces from the scene. So it is not like the criminal particularly cleans the whole evidence. So there is always some sort of shred of evidence that is taken taken by the criminal, as well as he leaves behind at the crime scene as well. So it is just about finding and observing those particular hints and clues. So essentially, even after the explosion, the work of the forensic experts, even if it is difficult, it is vital. Even in the ashes, they can find very crucial evidences. So according to Locard's principle, we cannot look away from these even traces of the evidence. So photographers capture the site from multiple angles. We have all seen the images. As I said, photograph, there is important element of, say, photography as well. And experts prepare sketches to guide later analysis. Burnt debris, car fragments and carbon residues are collected carefully for examinations as well. So in laboratories, these explosive experts use spectroscopic and chromatographic techniques to identify the chemicals involved. See, most of the time spectroscopy is very important sort of technique that is being used. What exactly is the spectroscopy? Is essentially it gives the spectrum. So essentially, particular spectrum, in the spectrum, the particular wavelength is associated with particular line, and that particular line is itself associated with particular element in the periodic table. So essentially, in the periodic table, you see all these elements and atoms. So each of these atoms and elements have unique sort of wavelength that they emit when under the spectroscopy. So essentially, if you observe that particular line, that particular wavelength line, that particular, then it is evidence of the presence of that particular element. So it is always true, spectroscopy is a huge field and it helps us actually understand the cause of, even the cause of the explosion properly, what sort of, say, element that is used in the, say, explosion, and what sort of what sort of elements the explosive itself contained. So that particular analysis is important. See, that's why, if spectroscopy and chromatography particularly helps in this regard. So that particular evidence and the analysis in that regard is also vital. So essentially in the Delhi explosion case also, no timer or electronic circuit was found. See, this point is very, very vital. So it is not like a classic sort of bomb blast. It is an, it is the blast created by the chemical that is being used, that is ammonium nitrate. So this ammonium nitrate will leave behind the traces. So those traces will essentially be seen through spectroscopy and chromatographic analysis, because they will leave behind, you will clearly see in the spectroscopy those particular lines that is associated with that particular element. So very, very true, important, technique that is being utilized effectively by forensics. So what sort of tests are being done? So these are very, very important from the perspective of science and technology. You may get a question in prelims in this regard. So just understand and know about these technologies, these techniques, if not in detail, but understand and just remember these very, very important techniques. So the experts use first and foremost Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy and attenuated total reflectance, FTIR. So what exactly is this FTIR? So Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. It is a type of spectroscopy. It is an analytic technique used to identify organic, polymeric and some inorganic materials. It works by measuring the sample which absorbs the infrared light at a different wavelength. So use of infrared light is very, very crucial here, and this particular test is generally used to identify the organic or polymeric and some inorganic elements in the sample itself. So essentially the infrared light that is being used, it is actually absorbed by certain wavelengths, and if certain wavelengths and associated spectra, if you observe, and if we found out the particular spectra that is associated with that particular element, that particular analysis gives us the presence of that particular element in the sample itself. So essentially it is very, very important analysis. It is used to identify unknown materials and analyze chemical compositions. It provides qualitative and sometimes quantitative sort of information as well, commonly applied in forensics particularly. In explosion analysis, FTIR helps detect residues of explosion or combustion products in debris samples. So that's why FTIR is used here. See, essentially particularly in explosion analysis like Delhi blast in recent times, FTIR plays very, very important role. This particular technique is very specific and it gives good results on the residues of explosives or combustion products that has that are there in the debris samples. So FTIR technique is important here. Another important technique to understand is Raman spectroscopy that is there. So you can clearly see the chemical composition of explosive is detected using field specific Raman spectroscopy as well. So Raman spectroscopy again is very, very important analytical tool in the hands of forensics. So they identify molecules and study their chemical structure by analyzing how light interacts with the sample. So as I earlier said, spectroscopy is very, very vital to identify the elements that are present in the sample. So Raman spectroscopy in particularly, Raman effect has been given by C.V. Raman, our own C.V. Raman. So particularly that particular, if you observe the Raman scattering in the sample, that means there are particular elements that are present in that particular, sample. So essentially, why? Because Raman scattering itself is a specific form of scattering. It is not like a regular Rayleigh scattering. So what exactly is Rayleigh scattering? So see, whenever there is monochromatic or laser light that is shined on material, most light scatters or without change. So if it doesn't change the category after say the sort of contact with the material, it is called Rayleigh scattering. But a small portion, even if it's scattered by a small portion with a shift in energy due to the molecular vibrations, that is called Raman spectroscopy. If you observe little bit of shift in the scattering or in the molecular, due to the molecular vibrations, that gives away that the sample has gone through the Raman scattering, and that particular Raman lines and Raman spectrum is very specific to the particular chemicals and particular elements. So that's how we we are able to detect the presence of particular element in those samples. So this is used effectively by the forensics to help detect explosives, drugs, paints and unknown substances. It is valued because of its high specificity, speed and ability to analyze samples directly. So it is not like you have to pre-prepare sample. You can just put in the sample in this whole Raman spectroscope, and it will give very specific accurate results. So Raman spectroscopy is based on, again, Raman effect, that essentially is that essentially depends on Raman scattering, which is different from, say, normal Rayleigh scattering. Just remember these things. Another important technique forensic use is advanced scanning electron microscope. Essentially, it used to analyze the morphology of the fragments found after the explosion, and X-ray dispersive ADX, particularly energy dispersive X-rays. Thermal analysis is also used. So just remember, thermal analysis particularly, it determines the information about explosives such as chemical activity and whether they are stable under the thermal conditions or not. Laser based scene mapping and flashpoint testing is also used to trace the fire's origin. See, particularly the fire spread very fast after the explosion. So what is the spread of the fire, to what extent we are able to, say, control the fire going forward in, say, if another explosion takes place of that sort of intensity. So by this particular laser based scene mapping and flashpoint testing, we are actually map the overall intensity of fire also. So to certain extent, these techniques are very, very vital. Just remember some of these techniques. FTIR is important. Raman spectroscopy, field specific Raman spectroscopy is vital. Again, another important chemical element that is used is ammonium nitrate, as I earlier said. So let's look at some of the properties of ammonium nitrate here. It is a white crystalline chemical. Remember that it is a crystalline chemical used mainly as a fertilizer. It is a fertilizer. Ammonium nitrate is very, very important nitrous fertilizer. It is an oxidizer feedstock in the commercial explosives. So this is also very important use. It's chemically stable under normal condition, but it is a strong oxidizer and can greatly increase the fire intensity if involved in a blaze. So that's why ammonium nitrate is a dangerous substance. Although it is a stable under normal conditions, but it is very strong oxidizer. So essentially it may create or it may increase the overall fire intensity. So that's why in blast, very huge blast, sometimes the more the quantity of ammonium nitrate, the bigger the blast is. For example, there is very, very famous 2020 Bairat port explosion. So we have all seen the visuals of that particular explosion on the social media at that point of time. So in that particular explosion also, on that particular port, there was the ammonium nitrate present on that particular port actually exploded, and it resulted in a huge sort of explosion. So when heated, confined, contaminated by combustible material or stored improperly, so the storage is an issue in that particular blast. Ammonium nitrate can undergo rapid decomposition and in the right conditions produce very large explosions. So the conditions needs to be right. Essentially, if heated, it becomes more explosive. So ammonium nitrate, it is chemical fertilizer, particularly for farmers, but it can be an explosive as well under the right conditions. So remember the role played by ammonium nitrate here, very, very vital from the perspective of science and technology. What is the role of some of the other experts like cyber forensic specialists? So there is we need to analyze the CCTV footage of the car. You must have seen the CCTV of that I-20 car as well, that is responsible for this particular explosion. Particularly, there is an angle of organized crime as well. So essentially, we have to look at that angle also to identify the original numbers. Investigators use thermochemical examinations, that is etching, typically conducted by a forensics physicist. DNA analysis on body parts is also done. We all know that. Collaboration among multiple forensic divisions are done so that the holistic investigation can be possible in this particular blast. So this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Again, very important analysis from the perspective of science and technology prelims part. So remember some of these techniques, very vital. So the second important article that we are going to take a look at is Supreme Court on saving the endangered species. So the Supreme Court judge here has criticized the Western imported concepts like intergenerational equity. So he bats for, say, ecocentric approach to actually preserve or conserve the endangered species. Particularly, the article mentions the great Indian bustard and lesser florican. Both the species are critically endangered species. Particularly, we have all seen the success of captive breeding programs when it comes to GIBs in recent times. So it is a positive news when it comes to the conservation of the species, but when it comes to lesser floricans, the situation is much more dire. So we need to focus more on this particular species of florican as well, lesser florican in particular. The numbers are very critical, like it is around 70 to 100 that in natural habitat. The number is very means low. So that so the conservation of these two species is mentioned in this particular article. The article also mentions the red Sanders case in Supreme Court. So in Supreme Court, particularly in this particular case, the Supreme Court focused more on, say, ecocentric approach. So most of the time, see, the argument here is that the Western concept, for example, intergenerational equity, is about, say, human-centric approach. So essentially, it talks about the utility of environment for the humans. So it is sort of very self-centered, human-centric view to look at the environment. What exactly is needed is, say, ecocentric approach. So environment, the nature has intrinsic value apart from, say, utility to humans. So that's why, when it comes to saving the endangered species, ecocentric approach generally helps. So that's what, ecocentric approach is given in the Red Sanders case or by the Supreme Court itself. So the judge in this particular article bats for the ecocentric approach to save the endangered species. So essentially, great Indian bustard and lesser florican numbers have plummeted, and the case is ongoing in the Supreme Court to save these species. So particularly now, the Supreme Court Judge Justice P.S. Narasimha has observed that many environmental law principles borrowed from the West, such as intergenerational equity, are anthropocentric and may not effectively protect endangered species. Well, that is very true. As I earlier said, these all concepts are human-centric, utility to human. That is the basic principle behind these principles themselves. So essentially, anthropocentric perspective here. So extinction is not an option for the species that are mentioned in these articles, particularly given the critical condition that they are facing. So criticism of intergenerational equity, I already told you that the judge said that, and in his words, that intergenerational equity have biblical roots, placing humans at the top. So this is the case that it is always the human utility that is focus of, say, concepts like intergenerational equity. The judge referred to Red Sanders conservation case 13 years ago. Particularly in this particular case, Supreme Court recognized the intrinsic worth of endangered species rather than their value to humans. So this particular principle is very vital. So it is ecocentric principle that the judge is batting for, and he said that the compassion for all living creatures under the biodiversity law is essentially the culture of India. So it is part of India's culture to have the compassion for all living creatures. We all know it. So to a certain extent, it gives us a fresh perspective. Most of the time, we all are just focus on the intergenerational equity. But essentially, when it comes to saving the endangered species, we have to take very holistic ecocentric approach. We have to understand that these species have intrinsic worth of their own. It is not like we can, derive their worth based on their value to humans. So essentially, means he bats for, say, newer ecocentric approach for the conservation of species. Now, let's come back to the species that are mentioned here. said let's look at some of the specific of these species. We have all discussed, means particularly in our earlier DNA episodes, we have already discussed these species. See, Great Indian Bustard, we all know it is an species of bustard. In India, there are more, means 4 to 5 bustard species, and one of the most critical out of them is Great Indian Bustard. Less than 200 individuals remain in the wild, although their range is varied, but most of them currently reside in, say, Rajasthan and Gujarat area. But you can clearly see its habitat is arid and semi-arid grasslands in India, particularly in Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka and Madhya Pradesh. So, these are some of the states, the range of which you can find Great Indian Bustard in. So, these are large, heavy-bodied bird with long legs, a long neck and distinct black and brown on the head. Males are longer or larger than females. You can clearly see the beautiful bird. It is one of the heaviest flying birds, standing tall, almost 3 feet to 4 feet tall, and weighing almost 18 kgs. So, you can clearly see the beautiful bird in question here. See, most of the time the problem for the conservation of these species is a slow reproduction rate. The female of these species only lays one egg at a time, and that too, it lays these eggs on the open grassland. So, many times the stray dogs and other species also prey on these eggs. So, to certain extent the replenishment of the population is also an issue. That's why captive breeding program has been done, and to certain extent that program is giving good results. So, in another of the development, Supreme Court has also sort of gave the judgment on, say, the power lines that are passing through through Desert National Park particularly. So, we have all seen the news in that regard. But Great Indian Bustard, again, critically endangered species, very, very vital. Another important species that is mentioned is Lesser Florican. So, Lesser Florican is another critically endangered species. It is also found on the grasslands, particularly in central and western India. Just 70 individuals in the wild. So, this is very, very, so Lesser Florican, also Lesser Bengal Florican is one of the most critical species of birds on the planet right now, but they are not the highlights. Just there is this very, very critical data that is there, that only 70 individuals remain. So, you can clearly see the beautiful bird here. So, appearance is obviously the males are striking black and white during the breeding season. Females have brownish for camouflage. Males perform high leaps and aerial displays during courtship. So, very, very important. So, you can see one of the bird here and in the courtship. So, when it comes to the mating season. So, obviously habitat destruction due to agriculture, plowing, grassland conversion, hunting and low breeding success, these are some of the reasons here. So, it is a critically endangered species, remember that. Another important species that is mentioned is red sanders. So, red sanders is a highly valued hardwood tree native to southern eastern Ghats of India. It is species specifically there in Eastern Ghats, remember that. It is particularly in Andhra Pradesh, dry deciduous forest in Western Ghats, remember that. So, illegal logging and smuggling is an issue when it comes to red sanders. So, you can clearly see the conservation status here. So, essentially Supreme Court has given the judgments way back 13 years ago in red sanders case, giving saying that we need to focus on, say, ecocentric approach to conserve the species, and not just say outside sort of perspective where they are valuable to human beings. They have intrinsic value of their ecological value of their own. So, these are some of the species that is there in the article. So, this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Very, very important. Just note down some of the points said by the judge here. So, very vital. Another important article is about risks in digital gold. So, SEBI has warned against investing in digital gold. So, what has happened now? We have all seen the rally in the gold in recent times, particularly on the eve of Dhanteras, the prices of golds particularly skyrocketed at that point of time. But currently also, although the prices have come down, but it is not like it has reached below 1 lakh or 1 lakh per 10 gram or something. It is still around 1,25,000. So, essentially, and it has stabilized at that level. So it is still high price for the gold, but in the way, in this particular wake, there is rush by investors towards buying digital gold as well. See, digital gold, instead of say storing physical gold with bank or within their own safes, digital gold give us lesser give investors lesser risk, because you do not have to have that physical gold in hand to earn the investment on it. So to certain extent, we have all seen the explosion of say digital gold demand in recent times, and many times what has happened is many online platforms, many including reputed ones like there is Google Pay or Phone Pay, all these also apps also, or digital payment companies also are coming up with digital gold coins or something like that. But SEBI has now warned against them, essentially saying that the risks involved are very high. So to certain extent, it is very true. This particular space has not been regulated properly by SEBI. So not all digital gold sort of investments are regulated by SEBI. There are certain gold ETFs, particularly sovereign gold bonds, that are under the SEBI regulation, but not all digital gold is, or digital gold related issues and schemes have been addressed effectively by SEBI regulation. So remember that. So, and SEBI has now cautioned the general public against investing in digital gold and e-gold products particularly. So regulators said digital gold products are often promoted as investment alternatives to physical gold. However, they remain unregulated and do not fall under any regulatory ambit. This is very, very vital here, exposing investors to heightened risks that is there. So essentially, just because the gold prices have rallied in recent times, if you don't know what exactly is the effect or the risks involved when it comes to buying digital gold, do not buy digital gold without understanding the risks. So that's the case, because not all digital gold related issues are addressed under the SEBI regulation. So there are very, very particular things here that are regulated by the SEBI, like as I said, gold bonds, sovereign gold bonds in particular. So what exactly is digital gold? Digital gold allows investors to buy gold without physically possessing it. As I earlier said, prices linked to physical gold. Obviously, the prices has been linked to the physical gold. Particularly, it is created using blockchain technology. So this is also the attraction here, that just because it has been created through say blockchain technology, it can be or it may be secure. It is secure to a certain extent, but as I said, there are risks involved, because it tends to fluctuate with the prices in say physical gold. So it is attractive option for the investor because it has a strong technological backup of say digital technology like blockchain technology for that matter, and it can be bought, sold and stored electronically as well. So to certain extent, there is an ease of sort of trading when it comes to digital gold. It is easily accessible, it can be sold quickly in emergencies and allows investors in small amounts compared to say traditional gold purchases. It also eliminates storage concerns. So these are all advantages of buying digital gold. Investors can convert digital gold into physical gold as well, needed, including coins, bars or jewelry for that matter. So sharp rise has actually given rise to say the demand for the digital gold in recent times. You can clearly see the numbers here. So essentially, what has happened now, the SEBI has cautioned against investing in digital gold if it is not properly regulated through proper SEBI channels. So these offerings are often marketed as convenient and alternatives to holding physical gold, but the digital gold products are different from gold related products regulated by it. These products are neither notified as securities nor regulated as commodities or derivatives. So essentially, they are just the products, they are just digital products. They are not regulated per se by SEBI. They are neither securities nor any commodity derivatives. Remember that. So that's why, according to SEBI, digital gold operates outside regulatory purview, exposing investors to significant risk, including counterparty and operational risks that are there. Investors protection mechanism available in security markets do not apply to digital gold. Very true. So essentially, even if there is some sort of say risks, most of the time if it is regulated by SEBI, there is an assurance of say investigation, there is some sort of compensation as well. So there is some sort of hedging when there is a SEBI regulation, but it is not the case when it comes to counterparty risk or operational risk involved in digital gold, because most of the time they are not regulated or operated under say SEBI regulated rules. Unlike gold ETFs and commodity derivatives, digital gold does not require demat account or margin deposits. So this is also advantage. You do not require any demat account or margin requirements for that, or margin deposits for that matter, making it more convenient and increasing investor interest. Even the smallest amount you can invest in digital gold. So that's the advantage. You do not have to have demat account in the first place, nor margin deposits in the bank accounts. Like margin deposits meaning being, you should have some sort of deposits first to invest. So essentially both organized and unorganized jewelers now offer opportunities to invest in digital gold. So that is the case. Organized jewelers are means to certain extent there is some sort of accountability, but unorganized jewelry sector is also giving digital gold options. So that is a problematic thing. So rising popularity of digital gold has also been fueled by social media as well, attracting more customers to it or investors to it. So digital gold is like an over the counter ETF carrying counterparty risk and possibility of default, which is SEBI's main concern here. So essentially it is exchange traded fund ETF, but it is over the counter ETF. So it does not come through proper SEBI channels. So it is definitely, there are risks involved. There is pretty much a possibility of default when it comes to buying digital gold. So remember that. So buy sovereign gold bonds or invest in some gold ETFs. So do not buy digital golds. That's the issue here. That's the point given by the SEBI. So what can be the way forward now? SEBI regulated gold products to minimize risk. So that's what investors argue, that you should invest in SEBI regulated gold products like gold, sort of gold bonds or gold ETFs. Exchange traded commodity derivatives, gold ETFs offered by mutual funds, electronic gold receipts for that matter can be traded through SEBI registered intermediaries under defined regulatory framework. So this is where you have to invest your money. Particularly commodity derivatives on regulated exchanges are supported by risk management systems, margin requirements, etc., etc. So essentially the article's main focus is on digital gold. So this is very, very important chart here. Gold reserves. UPSC has already asked the question on gold reserves globally. So as of the latest update, India is at 8th position when it comes to total gold reserves. Who is number one? Who's at number one position? United States with almost 8,000 tons of gold reserves. After that, you have Germany, Italy, France, Russian Federation, China, Switzerland, India, Japan, and Turkey. So we have all seen the update or news about India overtaking Japan. So but it is still out of top 5. Remember that. So India's gold deposit is around 841 tons. So it is substantial gold reserves. So this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So another important article is about Prime Minister's visit to Bhutan. So you can clearly see the bonhomie between say the Prime Minister and the King of Bhutan in this particular picture. So very, very vital article from the perspective of international relations, particularly our relationship with our tiny neighbor Bhutan is an ideal example of the neighborhood first policy. So India and Bhutan are connected not just by borders but by cultures. So this is a statement of the Prime Minister, very true. Essentially, Himalayan nations, he is on a 2-day visit of the Himalayan nation. So the PMO's statement here is important. So let's look at the statement as it is. Our relationship is one of values, emotions, peace, progress. When I became PM in 2014, my first foreign trip was to Bhutan. Even now, those memories touch my heart. The friendship between India and Bhutan has great depth and strength. So this is the PMO statement. So very, very the depth of the statement itself shows the critical value that is assigned to India-Bhutan relations by the Indian regime in particular. So essentially the Prime Minister Modi's first visit when he became the Prime Minister for the first time is also to Bhutan. So that also is very, very important here. So it is a strategic partnership between the two countries. So on Wednesday, Modi will join the 17th birthday celebrations of the former King of Bhutan, Jigme Singke Wangchuk. So this is that is the king's name. So he will participate in the 17th birthday celebration in Bhutan. So let's look at the analysis here between the bilateral relationship, the current status of bilateral relationship. Bilateral talks have been held between India and Bhutan. So, Prime Minister and the Bhutanese king will hold talks in covering the full spectrum of the bilateral relations, which include the cooperation in mostly energy, capacity building, connectivity, technology, defense, etc. Security also is important part here. Inauguration of Putangshu 2 hydroelectricity project. See, the energy is a very important component of bilateral relationship. Hydroelectric power particularly, the Bhutan provides us hydroelectricity. So, essentially the leaders jointly inaugurated 1020 megawatt Putangshu 2 hydroelectric project developed collaboratively by India and Bhutan. So, this is very historic development. Modi described project as an enduring symbol of friendship between the two countries. Both sides also agreed on resumption of work on the main dam structure of the 1200 megawatt Putangshu 1 hydroelectricity project as well. Obviously, there are condolences for the Delhi blast victims as well. Development and cultural initiatives are also very important. Land in Varanasi will be granted for Bhutanese temple, monastery and guest house. Important. Immigration checkpost will be established at Hatisar, India and Gelefu, Bhutan as well. So, Gelefu is in Bhutan. Remember that, places in news, very vital. Rupees 4,000 crore line of credit was given to Bhutan. So, it is also very important. It will support Bhutanese economy. Modi also highlighted mutual support between India and Bhutan during times of difficulty and emphasized the bond between the two countries. Cultural collaboration like Modi's visit also coincided with exposition of sacred Piprava relics of Lord Buddha, which were sent from India to Bhutan. So, that particular update in recent times also we have seen about Piprava relics, reflecting ongoing cultural and say religious ties between the two countries. So, what exactly? So, means we know the bilateral relation between Bhutan and India is strong. Let's look at another important aspect is Buddhism and Bhutan. So, most of the time this particular aspect is missed by the aspirants. So, I am covering this particular aspect here. So, Buddhism is the state religion of Bhutan. Remember that Bhutan has state religion, that is Buddhism, and it deeply influences the country's culture, governance and daily life. We all know it. It was introduced in the 7th, 8th centuries and has shaped Bhutanese societies over the centuries. But most important is what sort of branches and traditions that are observed in Bhutan. So, the main branch practiced in Bhutan is Vajrayana Buddhism, a form of Tibetan Buddhism. So, this point is very, very vital from the perspective of art and culture in GS1. Remember that. Also, you may get direct prelims question in that regard. So, in Bhutan, Vajrayana Buddhism is practiced. Vajrayana Buddhism is form of Tibetan Buddhism. So, within Vajrayana, Drukpa Kagyu is the dominant school and the spiritual lineage of the Bhutanese monarchy. Other schools like Nyingma, Sakya also have followers, though in small numbers. So, essentially, Vajrayana Buddhism's Drukpa Kagyu school is dominant. Apart from that, there is Nyingma and Sakya schools that are also there, but the number of people adhering to that particular school is small. Remember that. Particularly Dzongs, that is fortresses and monasteries, serve as religious and administrative centers. Monastic festivals called Techus are held annually in each district. Monastic system is prevalent. It plays vital role in religious education and community life of the people particularly. So, government and Buddhism, particularly Bhutan's constitution recognizes Buddhism as central to nation's spiritual and cultural identity. So, essentially Bhutanese constitution recognizes Buddhism as central to its cultural identity. King of Bhutan is considered as a protector of Buddhism and supports monastic institutions. So, modern relevance is also there, particularly internationally Bhutan is known for its high rank in gross national happiness index particular. So, essentially social norms, environmental conservation and governance, Buddhism's, these are basic tenets that are observed by the government and the society. That's why, it is considered that the Bhutanese society is happy all the time to a certain extent, although, it is an exaggeration of some sorts, but still, Buddhism, particularly Vajrayana form of Buddhism is the prominent sort of, religion in Bhutan. Remember that. So, this is about the historic ties between the two countries. See, most of the time, most important point to note here is Treaty of Friendship that is signed in 1949. India and Bhutan signed a Treaty of Friendship way back in 1949, where India gave a special role in India gave Bhutan a special role in its foreign policy and defense. So remember that. You can clearly see some economic and development cooperation, defense and strategic cooperation is also very important. Domestic relations and modern engagement, you can clearly see. But as I said, hydroelectricity and hydroelectric projects, energy projects between the two countries is very, very vital area of cooperation. So this is very important practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So in the decoded section that is important for means particularly, we are going to take a look at a very important article titled Discord over Tribunals. So essentially, in recent times, particularly, we have all seen the skirmishes that have happened between the judicial branch and they say the government when it comes to the Tribunal Reforms Act that was passed way back in 2021. So most of the time, the criticism by the Supreme Court in this regard is very visceral now. So what has said by the CJI in the recent hearing is very telling. So what does he said is, if you want to keep it after November 24th, you tell us frankly. So why he said it? Because CJI is retiring in the upcoming times, and the government wants wants this particular case to be heard by the separate bench or different bench where there is no current CJI essentially. So that's the contention here. But to certain extent, this particular remark was followed by a hearing on last Monday, during which the CJI described the centre's last-minute plea to refer the matter to larger 5-judge bench as tactic to avoid the bench of the CJI and Justice K.V. Chandran. Essentially, both these judges are very critical of the central government over its stance on, say, Tribunal Reform Act of 2021. So essentially, what is the basic issue here is that the Tribunal Reform Act that was passed way back in 2021, it is said that there are certain provisions in that particular act that essentially circumvented the earlier Supreme Court judgment. And that earlier Supreme Court judgment essentially quashed the ordinance actually issued by the central government means about, say, tribunal reforms, in which there are certain sort of provisions like 50-year rule for the appointment or 4-year tenure, etc., that are generally considered as antithetical to judicial independence. So there is there is this classic dispute between, say, judiciary and the executive legislative branch. So essentially the ordinance was quashed by the Supreme Court judgment as unconstitutional. After that, government essentially passed the same quashed ordinance through Tribunal Reform Act of 2021, and the case is again filed by Madras Bar Association in the Supreme Court, and that case is ongoing. And now the Supreme Court bench led by, say, CJI and this other judge is presiding over the case, and now the government is saying that they need to hear this particular case through larger bench of, say, 5 judges. So essentially, the CJI's contention is that you are avoiding that the government is avoiding his bench so that they can get a favorable verdict when it comes to Tribunal Reform Act. So it is essentially, he called it the very unfair move on the part of government towards the court. The CJI noted that Attorney General R. Venkatramani, representing the government, had been accommodated twice before. So they have actually adjourned the procedure twice before, but not anymore. So these are skirmishes that are there within the judiciary and the executive, and it shows that Indian democracy is very vibrant. Although there are skirmishes, essentially, but the constitutional democracy, the constitutional structure is still very strong. So that's what the debate and discussion is all about. So there needs to be the harmony or balance between all these branches of the government for the effective functioning of the democracy. But at the same time, the areas of areas of discontent is also there. So let's look at the basics now. An ordinance, an act and a challenge. As I earlier said, the original case has impacted, this particular ongoing case has impacted the tribunals across the country. So particularly due to this particular case, there is huge vacancy when it comes to tribunals. Like there are means big vacancies, for example, in administrative tribunals or even in GST tribunals as well, GST appellate tribunals, etc. So tribunals essentially are quasi-judicial bodies. These are not full bodies. See, most of the time, what is the purpose of having the tribunals? So that they can reduce the burden on the regular judiciary. So tribunals essentially means are very specialized sort of expertise oriented means bodies where you can have, say, the contribution by the experts. At the same time, it is a quasi judicial body, work on the principle of, say, natural justice. That's why, it speed up the whole process. So there is an ease of justice associated with the tribunals. So that's why they have been given priority sometimes to decide very specialized cases when it comes to, say, economy, administration, etc. So tribunal play very important role because they essentially lessen the burden on our judiciary. But in September 2021, the MBA, Madras Bar Association, challenged the constitutional validity of Tribunal Reforms Act, means calling it a direct attempt at legislative overruling. That's what the term that is used. You remember these terms. Legislative overruling of a Supreme Court judgment and claiming that it undermined the independence of the judiciary. So as I earlier said, the Tribunal Reform Act was passed way back in 2021. So let's look at some of the provisions of Tribunal Reforms Act here. So as I said, it was enacted by the Indian Parliament to restructure and rationalize tribunals in India. So that's the purpose, to restructure and rationalize tribunals. So there is an element of, say, too many tribunals also to certain extent. So that there needs to be rationalization. See, most of the time, when it comes to the act about tribunals, it was very old. The appointment process is not very clear. So essentially, in the process of restructuring and sort of rationalizing tribunals, the spirit of it is found in 2016, the Finance Act of 2016. But essentially, the act by Parliament in this regard, that is Tribunal Reforms Act, was passed in 2021. It replaced earlier ordinances and amendments, particularly Tribunal Reform Ordinance that was actually quashed by Supreme Court. The Act aims to improve efficiency, reduce redundancy and bring uniformity in the functioning of the tribunals. See, some of the key provisions are very important here. As I said, abolition and merging of tribunals. Certain tribunals have been abolished or merged. For example, Film Certification Appellate Tribunal and the Airport Appellate Tribunal, whose functions were transferred to other judicial or administrative bodies. Some tribunals have been merged, some tribunals have been totally abolished as well. So appointment and qualification, this is very contentious issue here, and even Supreme Court has actually pointed it out in its judgment, specific judgment. Specific qualifications and expertise required for chairperson and members. Introduces a minimum age 50 years for the appointment process. Sets the term of office and conditions for reappointment, particularly 4 years. Service condition and salaries, determines salaries, allowances and conditions of service for the tribunal members. Specific removal procedures for chairpersons and members have been also given in the Act. Administrative rationalization is the priority. Seeks to streamline functioning and reduce duplication across tribunals. So obviously, there are controversies and criticisms associated with this particular Act. So essentially, in July 2021, Supreme Court struck down similar provisions in the earlier ordinance, citing that violated the principle of judicial independence and separation of powers. Questions remain about, say, reenactment of the same provisions under the said Act now. So tenure and age experience requirements, the court held that the members with at least 10 years practice should be eligible and younger appointments encouraged, not 50-year age limit. Executive or legislative control versus tribunal autonomy. Tribunal needs to be autonomy, needs to hold certain autonomy as well. These are not legislative bodies, these are or executive bodies, these are semi-judicial bodies. So that's why they need to have the shred of autonomy, so that there is unblemished justice by tribunals themselves. The code questioned the mechanisms which might allow excessive executive influence, for example, short terms, reappointment incentives, or appointment panels with limited options, etc. These are some of the criticisms, strong criticisms advocated by the Supreme Court particularly. So, what is behind this long-running tussle over tribunals, by the way, between say executive, legislative branch, government essentially, and judiciary? The legislative and judicial tussle over governance began way back in 2017 with the Finance Act, as I said. So, Finance Act did try to rationalize and restructure the tribunals by abolishing some and actually merging other tribunals with giving clear requirements about, say, age limits, tenure, etc., which empowered the center to frame the rules for tribunals. So, that is also very, very problematic. It gave the total authority to center over the tribunal. So, that is the point here. It actually compromises the judicial independence that is also to a certain extent fundamental to functioning of, say, functioning of the strong democracy, particularly separation of power is the very, very vital. The rules were struck down by Constitution Bench of the Supreme Court in the Roger Matthew case of 2019 for undermining judicial independence. So, these particular rules that are enacted through, say, Finance Act of 2017 were struck down as unconstitutional by Supreme Court in Roger Matthew case of 2019. Then, center issued the amendment or rules in 2022 through the ordinance, and that again was challenged by, say, Madras Bar Association. The Supreme Court recommended modifications including a 5-year tenure for tribunal members to ensure independence, noting that shorter terms would discourage qualified candidates and invite executive interference. But in April 2021, the center promulgated an ordinance fixing tenure at 4 years and setting the minimum appointment age at 50 years. 3 months later, the Supreme Court struck down these provisions as arbitrary and contrary to the separation of power principle. Separation of power essentially is the bedrock of, say, functioning democracy. In response, the Parliament passed Tribunal Reform Act of 2021, reenacting the same provisions that the court had previously declared unconstitutional, continuing the legislative judicial back and forth. So, this is the background of the whole saga here. The judiciary, central Supreme Court versus the government sort of tussle over the control of tribunals. The arguments given by petitioners, read by, say, MBA, that is Madras Bar Association, what is their contention is that 4-year tenure makes tribunal members insecure and vulnerable to excessive executive pressure. That is to a certain extent true. 50-year age limit arbitrarily excludes capable younger lawyers, even though one can become a high court judge at a younger age. So, this is the irony here. Even if you want to become a tribunal member, you need to have 50-year age. But on the other hand, even high court, even at some younger age, you can become a high court judge. The union government in its counter affidavit, what exactly to these two provisions, what the union government argued in its counter affidavit is the age limit ensures that the candidates have sufficient experience, because tribunals work on, say, specialized experience, and that a 4-year term with the possibility of reappointment provides adequate security. So, there is a possibility of reappointment that gives them the security of job. The government further defended the act as matter of policy and falling within the parliament's executive domain, and claimed that striking down these provisions would violate the separation of power principles themselves. So, it is part of policy. The government is saying that it is rightly in the domain of, say, parliamentary legislation, the executive domain, and the rule making, particularly in this regard, is in exclusive sort of part of, say, legislative business. So, essentially, it is the central government is defending it as part of, say, separation of power. And if the Supreme Court struck it down now, it will be against the separation of power principles. So, after looking at all this important background, let's look at the fallout. What exactly is the fallout? The standoff over appointment and service conditions has caused significant delays in filling vacancies across the key tribunals. As I earlier said, there are important data points to remember here. There are very high vacancies in some tribunals. As of December 2022, government data showed major gaps. So this is also, the data is itself 3 years old, by the way, and that has been given in the article. That's what I am using here. So National Company Law Tribunal, for example, 24 vacancies out of 32 sanctions posts for that matter. So almost 24 seats are vacant out of 32. Armed Forces Tribunal, 24 vacancies out of 34 posts. Income Tax Appellate Tribunal, 18 out of 63 judicial member posts are vacant. Railway Claims Tribunal, for that matter, both vice chairman posts and 16 of the 20 judicial members posts are still unfilled. Central Government Tribunal cum Labour Courts and National Industrial Tribunals, only 13 presiding officers against 22 sanction strength. The Supreme Court has previously noted that such delays in filling the vacancies have left the tribunals virtually defunct. So that's the observation of the Supreme Court here, virtually defunct. It has been left virtually defunct, highlighting the urgent need for timely appointments. So Supreme Court is advocating for the timely appointments of, say, the members, but to certain extent, this particular challenge to the Tribunal Reforms Act of 2021 that is pending now in the Supreme Court will hold important cards going forward. So to what extent, we will see whether there will be new 5-judge bench that will hear the matter, or the CJI keep it to himself. So we will see the update in that regard in the coming times, but definitely it is affecting the overall functioning and efficiency of the tribunals. So this is very important practice question for you. That's it from my side, and stay tuned for another edition of Daily News Analysis. Thank you.